All right, so we're back. We're going to just get straight into it, keep moving on. So hopefully that last part wasn't too confusing for you. And again, like, you're going to have to discuss it with someone before the weekend. Talk to somebody at lunch or in class right now, just if you're having a hard time with what's going on, because I think it's not terrible. So I don't know. I could be wrong. What we're going to do here is basically just go through a bunch of examples, and this is stuff that you're going to end up seeing on your homework. So we'll start with example 1. I think it's like through example 9. We'll see if we get to all of them. And if this one is terrible, then I'm sorry, I got a plane to catch. So, okay. Example 1. We're going to deal with the square root of negative 64. This is really where I comes from. It's where it comes into play. When we have a negative inside the square root, okay? This negative inside the square root is our issue. So what we're going to do, and you can just trust that we can do this, is we're going to take the square root of 64, and we're going to multiply it by the square root of negative 1. We're essentially taking this and breaking it down into 2 parts. Totally legal, totally valid. No mathematical errors there. The nice part about this is we know what the square root of 64 is. It's just 8. And we know what the square root of negative 1 is. It's I. That's the whole point of us doing this unit. So, boom, there's my answer. The square root of negative 64 is 8i. When we have a negative in the square root, we can basically just take the negative part out, call it I, and then multiply by whatever the result of the number is. Okay, so let's do another one. The square root of negative 25. For this one, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take the square root of 25 times the square root of negative 1. This part is just I. That's the whole point of it. And the square root of 25 is just 5. Boom. We're done. That's it. We've fully simplified it. Note that both my answers here, they have a power of 1 for I. So we're good. We haven't fallen into like that having to simplify or anything. That's it. Those are my answers. Hopefully those weren't too bad. Again, if any of this seems like fast or if you're having a hard time, I am trying to kind of squeeze it in, but also like this will be on the website, so just go check it out. And if you're watching this for the second time on the website, I'm sorry that you just had to hear that twice. Moving on to example 3. This one's a little bit tougher. Again, this is, I think I just said that people traditionally are pretty terrible at simplifying radicals. Maybe I didn't say that. It might have been the first try I tried to make this video. Traditionally, you are terrible at simplifying radicals. If this is going to give you a hard part, then, or like a hard time, then you're going to want to go on to Khan Academy and Google how to simplify radicals, or talk to a friend that is good at it. I can explain it. I think I actually have a really good explanation, but since I'm not there, that'll be something that you'll need some more help with in the meantime. And then Monday I can clear up any questions if you're like, I really don't understand what you're doing with like the breaking it down with the tree and all that stuff. So for this one, the square root of 40 times the square root of negative 1. This part is just I. And then we have to break down 40. And in order to kind of figure out what that is, I break it down into, let's say, like 4 and 10. And we know the square root of 4 is 2. So we have a 2 that gets to come outside of the square root. And 10 is not have a nice square root. If we kept breaking that down, it's not going to work out. So 2 root 10. And then, but we still have that I, right, times I. So what we do is we kind of just squeeze it in front here. We're going to put it right there. So 2i root 10 would be our final answer for that. Moving on. Example 4. We have 3i times 4i. This is no different than if I had something like 3x times 4x, right? I think a lot of you would right off the bat be like, oh, this is just 12x squared, and you'd be correct. Well, my result here is no different. This is 12i squared. But then we have to notice that this guy has a power greater than 1. So we have to simplify. I can't stress that enough. People lose a lot of points on tests and quizzes because of things like that. You have to simplify this. So if we go back up to our chart, we can see that I squared is negative 1. So until you memorize that, make sure you kind of have those 4. These are something like you could write this on your quiz right when you get it. And make sure that you have that down so that you know I to the 0th is 1, I squared is I to the 1st is I squared is -1, I cubed is -I. Okay. So I know I squared is -1, so this is 12 times -1, which is -12. Boom. There's my answer. I'm done. Okay. Example 5. Example 5 is the square root of -20 times the square root of -12. These are the hardest ones for students, in my opinion. I think that people have a really hard time with these in general. What I'm going to do is break it down kind of part by part. And just remember that everything's being multiplied. So this is the square root of 20 times the square root of -1 times the square root of 12 times the square root of -1. So I'm just taking the -1s out of each piece individually. And then I need to break down 20. And this is just I, right? We're just going to go right ahead and do that right now. I. This is 4 times 5. And we're looking for numbers, groups of 2. There it is. 4 is 2 times 2. So one of these is going to come outside, the other one's dead. So this is going to be 2 root 5 times I. And this is 2 times 6 and then 2 times 3. There's my group of 2. This is going to end up being 2 root 3 times I. Again, if you're like, dude, I really never learned radicals, then I'm really good at explaining it. I don't have the time to go super in depth right now. So check out online or something tonight if you're struggling on how that's happening, or talk to someone in the class who knows what they're doing. And then I'm just going to sort of arrange everything. So let's put the roots next to each other and the i's next to each other so we can see it a little better. And then in order to multiply this, you multiply the outside and inside together. So 2 times 2 is 4. The inside is 5 times 3 is 15. And I times I is I squared. And again, we just talked about that. I squared is -1. So 4 root 15 times -1 is -4 root 15. That's going to be our final answer there. So square root of -20 times square root of -12 is -4 root 15. Again, that is a hard one, but there's definitely ones like that on the test and quiz. You need to know how to do those. So make sure you understand somewhat what's going on there, or make sure you get help from me on Monday when I'm back. Example 6. So this is I to the 31st power, and this is one we just did, right? We take the power, we divide it by 4. 4 goes into 31 7 times. 7 times 4 is 28. 28, so 31 minus 28 is 3. That is the key. This is saying that I to the 31st is equivalent to I to the 3rd because of this guy. That's exactly where that's coming from. And again, if I want to go back up to my chart or whatever I wrote on my test or my quiz, so I know, I cubed is -I. So I to the 31st is -I. Done. We simplified it. It has a power of 1. We did it. Good job. Okay. Example 7. This is where we're going to be solving for x. This particular one isn't going to have an imaginary value, but it's a good setup because it's a lot like this. You guys forget this all the time, or your teacher didn't teach you well enough, but that's okay. X squared minus 25 equals 0 is the problem we're dealing with. We're going to add 25 to both sides so that we solve for x. So x squared equals 25. And then the next is just take the square root of both sides. That part's not too crazy, right? We want to get x by itself. We have x squared. We take the square root of both sides. and we end up with x equals, and a lot of you are going to say 5, and a lot of you are correct, but you need to have a plus or minus. When you are solving for x squared and you have to use the square root, your result must have a plus or minus in front of it. This is plus or minus 5. For those of you that had geometry last year with me, hopefully you're like, oh yeah, he said that was going to happen. Yes, it will, and it does, okay? Again, something I can get more in depth on Monday, but whenever you are solving for x squared and you need to use the square root, your answer must have a plus or minus 5. Only when you're doing it for x squared. If you're saying the square root of 36, the answer is not plus or minus 6, because I'm not solving for x there, right? I'm just saying the square root of 36 is different. Okay, if you're solving for x squared and you use the square root, it has to have a plus or minus. That comes into play with our next example, where we have x plus 36 equals 0. Sorry, x squared plus 36 equals 0. This one, very similar. We're going to subtract 36 from both sides. And then I'm going to take the square root of both sides to solve for x. But now, there's my problem, right? This is why we learned imaginary values. I have a square root of negative 36, so I have to have my I value. So this is going to end up being 6i. Hopefully you're okay with that, right? We're going to separate that square root of negative 1 out. That's going to be I. Square root of 36 is just 6. But we have to have plus or minus. There's got to be 2. All right? Okay, example 9, last one, and then we're done for now. Example 9 is 4x squared plus 100 equals 0. Oof. So we're just going to solve like we normally would. Subtract 100, and we get negative 100. Divide by 4, and we get x squared equals negative 25. And now it's just like one that we did on this side, where we're going to take the square root of both sides. X equals 5i. And because we were solving for x squared, and we had to use the square root, we have to also put a plus minus. Final answer. So that's it for today. Your homework is going to be on the website, and I'll make sure I post the book tonight so that you guys have that. Just make sure that if you didn't get all of this, feel free to go back and check it because it's on the website. So go back and take a look. Talk with your neighbors. If you guys didn't get through all of it because it took a while to get everything set up, then again, check it. Well, I guess you wouldn't even be hearing this right now, would you? But yeah, well, okay, that's irrelevant. Never mind. Have a great weekend. I will see you guys on Monday. Thanks for trying to pay attention.